quick look. I'm going to take a look at two different drones, two of the more popular ones on the market. One is going to be the Parrot Bebop drone, which has a 1080p lens on the front. The other one's going to be looking at the new DJI Phantom 3. And if we start by looking at the Parrot drone, we get a rough listing of the specs. And it turns out, sure, we got a quad core, we got memory, we got a top horizontal speed of 45 miles an hour. Wow. Right, Linux, but if you look really carefully at the specs, The thing is its own flying router with DHCP enabled. Awesome. There's something else I found really interesting if you read the specs. It's got a really interesting GPS chips in there using American GPS and Russian-based GPS. So what happens if I muck with that? Right? There's a couple other things that kick in. Easy for me to say, the Free Flight 3 app is installed on your Android device or your iOS device. You can get updates to that. If an update comes out, you don't have to forcibly install that update. You can ignore it. It doesn't come through the App Store. It actually is just sitting there. It checks their website, so you can apply the update. A couple other things that are interesting, the return to home function. And I'm sitting here thinking, all right, if he's flying near me and I want to swat it and get it away, maybe I can take advantage of the return to home function and send that thing back home. The height distance thing is very interesting. If the thing is flying above 10 meters, it will fly back to its original return to home point. If it's flying less than 10 meters, the thing will automatically shoot up 30 feet. Turn face home, and then fly home in a straight line. So if you have a house where you can pick up GPS and say you're in your living room with a ceiling fan, you may not want to hit the return to home feature because that gets very ugly fast. That's how I lost my first drone. There's something else I wanted to take a look at, and I see this in your documentation. If the Bebop drone loses connectivity with the controller for 30 seconds, this thing is supposed to fly home. That makes me want to say, what would happen if I screw with the Wi-Fi signal? Or what happens if I screw with GPS? Or what happens if I introduce a magnetic field around the thing? So let's go through it real quick. This thing actually flies with its own MAC address. It's running DHCP. We can actually scan this with a number of tools. I happen to have a Pineapple router around. I didn't use Darren Kitchen's Infusion, which is really cool. Actually, I didn't know that Infusion existed at the time. But it's neat. There's an underlying Wi-Fi connection that gets established between the two devices, and then on top of that, the applications talk to one another. So let's introduce ourselves a little mischief, shall we? What happens if we de-auth our original connection for, say, 30 seconds? It turns out the return to home function did not work correctly for me, and I did this like 5 times. I lost like 6 propellers at the time doing this test. Here's what it looks like when all of a sudden this thing gets de-authed for 30 seconds. It sits there and flies, boink, it just landed. All of the rotors stopped at the same time and it went straight down. Maybe it got lost, maybe it thought that was going to be home, I don't know. But clearly that didn't work, so now I can just walk out into my property and pick the damn thing up. You want it, kid? Come and get it. Maybe there's something else we can do. I got it. Let's give it a quick scan. And it turns out when we scan it with Nmap, yup, it's a flying FTP server just floating around. Oh, that's awesome. I had 10 devices simultaneously connected to this guy all at once. Only one app was talking, but the other 9 were sitting there waiting. We'll get back to that in a second. It turns out this thing is a flying FTP server, and there are 2 particular directories I found interesting. One was the media directory, where the little monster next door was filming videos, and the other was the thumbnail directory. No authentication was required to connect over FTP. I think that's fantastic. So I was sitting there and thinking, while it was in flight, Maybe I can grab his pictures and replace him with something like that. That was a fun day. Yeah, well, that was cool. All right, so I'm taking the videos you got of all the neighbors because maybe I want to just see what they look like. But then there's this monstrosity, Telnet, wide open, while the thing is flying, which kills me. So I Telnet directly into the box, and here's a listing of the entire directory structure right there. Now it's running BusyBox from like 3 years ago. Right? This thing I purchased just a couple months ago for this presentation, and they never updated BusyBox. There have been something like 10 updates to BusyBox since this came out, but they haven't updated it. But I want you to look really carefully at 3 things for me. Take a look at those shell scripts sitting right there. So, I took drone number 2. This gets to be a very expensive research project soon. He was hovering in my kitchen. I Telnet directly to the box, and all of a sudden I see that. I'm like, that's pretty cool. So I wonder what happens if I type in this and hit enter. I am suddenly greeted with all of that. I was sitting there working in the kitchen, it was hovering, and then all of a sudden, it took out my stove. I was thinking the shutdown feature would gracefully just shut down the rotors and down it would go. This thing, there was no graceful shutdown. It literally flew right by, and I'm like, wow. So if I was one of those cool dudes who got like carbon fiber blades, this is what it looks like in the park. It's flying, hit the command there, boink, and down it goes. There is no restart from that, right? If you go look at some of the software exploits that are out there, it kills a running process and the thing fires back up. This is off. It's done. By the way, in case you missed it, because it always looks better in slow motion, if it's running near a wall, it gets updraft and there's no telling where it's going to go. I was going to do that in here today. I fired this up this morning and 6 wonderful conference attendees had connected to my open Telnet connection. I'm not bitter, but you did steal my thunder. So there's another thought. I mean, shutting that thing down, great. So I had a coworker who looked at this and said, you know, that's not really epic. You should launch that thing like 400 feet in the air and crash it. And I'm like, well, give me your drone. So why don't we just take the damn thing, right? Kid, you knocked your ball into my yard. I'm going to take it. So we actually have 2 simultaneous connections to the same drone at the same time. If I am sitting there, and again, remember, I had like 10 devices all connected to it simultaneously. This is what it looks like from the iPad that is currently controlling the Bebop drone. It has access. It's hovering at 1 meter. I ran this inside a hotel lobby. They were not happy. This is what my iPhone sees. Okay. I'm connected to the network, but my app's not connecting. This is what we have. Hey, wait a second. Why don't I just send a quick deauth? The moment that deauth kicks in, the controller automatically says, I'm disconnecting. Right away. He is automatically having a bad day. So the question I have for you is, in this race condition, who's going to win? If he is running an iPad anywhere near indoors, he is going to pick up his home network or any other network before he picks up his Bebop drone connector, which I think is great, which means he is going to sit there and try to reconnect even though his underlying network connection is not there, and it's going to freeze. Meanwhile, on my iPhone, I've connected. I'm there. And I was sitting there and I connected because I de-auth him, my Wi-Fi connection was good. Note the altitude list though on this. It now thinks that is 0. The thing was 3 feet in the air. So it didn't get an update for that, which means I'm off and running and now I am the guy who is in charge of that drone and he can't do anything about it. If I click the button at the top that says emergency, that thing just falls from the sky and away as it goes, which I think is great. One of the other things that kicks in with the Free Flight app that runs on top of the network connection, again, it's going to pair to any other network before it comes back to this particular drone, and I think that's fantastic. Now, for those little enthusiasts who have more money, the Bebop drone comes with an optional Sky controller that looks like this. It's supposed to be a range extender. It turns out that that is its own wireless access point too. And it's wide open, which means we can de-auth in one of 2 spots. If we de-auth between the iPad, which is literally just sitting in the cradle, it is not tethered, it's just sitting there connecting wirelessly. If I de-auth that and I connect my iPhone or my iPad to it, all of a sudden I get these little controller icons sitting right there, which means I have control of you. If I'm nice, I will temporarily send control back to your controller and then I'll steal it away from you. And I can go back and forth, which means he's going to respond all over the place, which means he's mine. I don't have to worry about it. I mean, I think coding would be great, writing an exploit would be great, but the app is free. It's already been developed and Telnet's wide open. So what happens if we start looking around at other areas like GPS, right? And this is interesting because if you pull up the specs, there are several very specific frequency ranges used in the US and several specific ranges used with the Russian GPS system. What if we screw with those signals? Now, there's one teeny tiny little problem with that. It's illegal. Like 18 different ways of illegal. Like you are currently fined $16,000 for every day that you do this, up to $112,000. And if you go to the FCC's website, they have a spot where you can report people. They list of all the people that they've sent notices to and fined. So what to do? I talked to the DHS guy.